Good morning. It's Bernard Nomberg with Nomberg Law Live, another Tuesday talk, and I've got my friend Chervis Isom here. Chervis, welcome and good morning.
Good morning to you, Bernard. Happy to be here.
I hope that folks who are tuning in to us in a few minutes or watch us later on, if you're from Birmingham, if you've spent any time here, you certainly know Chervis, and he's been in Birmingham for many years. He's a lawyer, but he's so much more. He's an author, he's a community activist and a community leader, and I'm so pleased to be with you today.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
The reason why we're here is as I wanted to have a discussion with you today, Chervis, about the book that you wrote that really, I read this, The Newspaper Boy, and we'll get into the specifics about it in a few minutes, but I was so moved by the words that you wrote that I've actually read the book 3 times. I wanted you to know that.
That's torture.
No, it really wasn't torture. In anticipation of today, I reread it over the last few weeks. Thank you for providing your story here. Chervis, I know that you were born up in Franklin County, but moved to the Birmingham area as a young child.
Yeah, thank God, because I went up there for a funeral recently. I don't know how I could have survived in the country.
Is that right?
I'm an urban dweller.
Well, tell us a little bit about do you remember anything from Franklin County, or were you really young?
I think my parents brought me and my brother here when we were, very young.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect I was about 4 years old. My brother too.
Well, certainly. And then you moved into I don't know if it was directly, but you moved into the Norwood community.
Yeah, the first home I remember was at the corner of 23rd Street and 11th Avenue, which is now part of the BJCC property, a block from the Top Golf. That's what I remember.
For those of you who know the topography and the neighborhoods of Birmingham, and those of you who don't, let's describe the Norwood community a little bit geographically. Where does it fit?
It sits. I would say it's northeast of downtown Birmingham, but it's only a mile. It's just on the other side of the I-20 59 interstate that cuts right through the city. It's is surrounded by industry on all sides, except on the west, and there it merges about at Caraway Hospital area with Druid Hills, and then that goes on westerly to Fountain Heights and North Smithfield. That ridge runs all the way out. It's Enon Ridge. It runs all the way out parallel to Red Mountain to Inslee Highlands, and so it's a ridge not as high as Red Mountain, but it produces Red Mountain and Enon Ridge produce together the valley called Jones Valley, where the city is situated. And Norwood is in the eastern part of that, and it's mostly hills and a ridge line.
Certainly. Now Chervis, growing up in the Norwood community, tell us a little bit about. I've heard you describe. I've read interviews with you. That it at times it was really an idyllic childhood for you on certain aspects. Other aspects not nearly as memorable, but tell us about that.
Well, Norwood was a very diverse neighborhood, and I say diverse. We had a few country people like my folks. Mostly it was city people. A lot of Italians, Greeks. So it was a very ethnic community. I would say diverse, except we had almost no blacks. The blacks were on the peripheries of Norwood, around the railroads. And today, of course, the neighborhood is probably 95% black. And it's still a great neighborhood. Norwood is a great neighborhood. I'd like to live over there myself, but my wife won't go.
It certainly has evolved over the years. But you were living there. Your childhood was in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, I grew up. I was in grammar school at Norwood School until 1953. Then went to Phillips High School for 4 years.
Certainly.
And so, yeah, I grew up in the late 40s and 50s.
Well, let's talk about one of your first jobs, and the title of the book. I assume.
Well, the newspaper boy. Yeah, that was really the first thing that happened to me that was meaningful, really meaningful, and I mean that in this way. I was a very shy, withdrawn kid and didn't really have very many friends. And so when I was 13, my dad let me get a newspaper route, and that made me who I turned out to be, because I had to go to the doors and knock on doors and collect for people and get new customers, and it made me come out of my shell. And so it was a developed in a developmental way. It was the thing that really got me out of my shell.
And at some point, the newspaper company ran a competition.
Yeah, several. We had. I mean, it was something they did quite often, and it was to encourage the newsboys to go get new customers, because that's where the profits are, new customers, both for the newspaper boys and obviously for the newspapers. So, yeah, we in the summer of 1956, I think it was, I won a trip to Jacksonville, Florida, and a bunch of newspaper boys on a school bus drove to Jacksonville for I don't know, 4 days, I guess. It was a nice trip, and I enjoyed it. Then the next year they had a contest, and the winner would win a car. Man, that was a big deal.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 17, and I wanted to win that car really badly, and so that put me to work.
Well, it seems like you had a real incentive in that, and I'll let you describe it, how you increased your percentage or your number of customers that ultimately, the way I read, if I'm reading this correctly, ultimately had some collateral benefits for you that may not have been necessarily the intended benefit.
Well, yeah. I was desperate to get more customers. I had a lady on my newspaper route, Helen Miller, who talked to me every Saturday morning, and she was giving me life guidance, I guess you'd say. She was from South Dakota. Her husband from Minnesota. They'd moved down here because he got a job with the Southern Progress. Before that, it had another name. And they were just kind to me, and I was trying to convert them to the Southern way of life, that is Jim Crow, and they didn't understand that, and they were, particularly Helen was working on me, trying to make me someone not guided by prejudice, and so she, I was telling her I really wanted to win that car, but I didn't have the ability, didn't have that many people on my route who didn't already take the paper. I didn't have a way to win it, and she challenged me to go to the black enclaves along the railroads, and I was afraid to do that and told her I didn't want to do it. I was afraid to do it, et cetera, but she pushed me, and I did do it after much soul searching, and that was a life-changing event. I found out the truth that black folks and their dreams are no different than white folks. And it's just something that never occurred to me could be true, yet it was true, and I found out for myself. And that was something I wouldn't have done but for her pressure. And for that, I'll always be grateful.
And as a result, you got to know folks from a completely different neighborhood from where you were living.
It was on the margins of Norwood, but it was not in the primary geographic area. Yeah, so I expanded my paper route by including some black enclaves that had not been on my paper route before. Yes.
What was that feeling like the very first day you ventured into the neighborhoods that previously you never thought that you would?
Well, I remember being terrified when I knocked on doors. It took it took courage for me to do that, because I thought they would be rude to me, mean to me. I thought I might get, beat up or something. I don't know. They were kind to me. Black folks were, in many ways, many of them were kinder than any of my other customers. And so, yeah, I was transformed by those efforts on my part to reach people who I didn't really know or understand.
That they may have been as surprised to see you as the fact as you were to have yourself actually there.
Probably. I don't know. I just it was a life-changing experience for me.
Well, as a result of increasing your customer base, did you end up getting that car?
Well, I shouldn't tell that, but it's right on the inside cover.
Let's
That's
show
me
it.
and my car.
Let's show that.
Yeah.
There it is. That's awesome.
It's not a new car now. It was a 1950 Ford.
Mm-hmm.
But
And what year was this that you won the car?
57.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a nice car.
Well, take us forward after being delivering newspapers for several years. You went on to college.
Yeah, I went to Birmingham Southern College, and I had never been a good student, but I found myself at Birmingham Southern. I found that I did have the ability to compete in an academic environment. I didn't know that until I got to Birmingham Southern, and I just had worked my newspaper routes and worked hard. I had a morning route and an afternoon route, and so I never had time to study much, and didn't really see it having much relevance to my life until I got to college and realized, whoa, I've got a lot to learn, and so I did pretty well in college and went to law school, and education's the key. My dad always said that, although he had no education. He said education's the key. I didn't hear him, but I found it for myself.
Certainly. Well, for those of you just joining us, thank you for tuning in. Mark, Eric, Mrs. Patel, thank you guys for spending a few minutes with us. We're with Chervis Isom, a local attorney, local community leader and activist. A few years ago, Chervis wrote the book, The Newspaper Boy, a coming of age in Birmingham, Alabama during the Civil Rights era. And I've read Chervis's book a few times now, and it just struck a real chord with me. In fact, the book, I want to read a quote to you before we get to that, Chervis. You were asked a few years ago about why you wrote the book, and this quote really, to me, kind of sums up things, and I want to have your response to it. When you were asked why did you write the book, you said, one other thing that made me want to write it was the thought that each of us is not totally alone here in the universe, though we sometimes feel like it. We need to be part of a community, and even to be involved in what goes on in our community. It's a human need, and I think it's very important to our development as individuals.
Well, that's true. And I wrote about community in my book toward the end, the importance of community in our lives. The real reason I wrote the book, and that was probably a collateral reason, is simple gratitude. I was in 2006. I went to a funeral of a client of mine, and he was the most humble, nicest businessman you've ever seen. The rabbi gave a eulogy, and the eulogy was built around the concept of gratitude. This gentleman, Max, was grateful for everything that had been done for him. His parents had come to America from Russia. He was happy to have been able to go to public schools here, and in college here. He was grateful for his business partner. He was grateful for the friends at Temple. Grateful for everything that. Even, he said he was even grateful on April 15 to be able to pay his taxes. It was an astounding eulogy about the concept of gratitude. And I thought to myself afterwards, I'm grateful. You buy me a cup of coffee, I'll say thank you. I've said thank you over and over all my life. But have I ever said thank you to those people who changed my life? Like my father. Well, it's too late. My father's gone. Like Abe Berkowitz. He was gone too, and I was thinking about it. I thought about the Millers. They really made an impact on my life when I was 16 and 17 and 18, because I started out as a racist, and I'm part of the Jim Crow culture, and they set me on a different path. And I'd never said thank you. I didn't know, are they dead? But I looked up the phone book. There it is, Vernon E. Miller. And I called him. This was in 2006. And he remembered me, or said he did, and I went to see them, and I finally said thank you to them.
Mm-hmm.
And this book, in many ways, and I dedicated this book to the 4 little girls, in memoriam to the 4 little girls who were killed in the September 15 bombing, plus Virgil Ware and Johnny Robinson, who were killed on the very same day in racist events. But I dedicated it to my friends Vernon E. and Helen Miller, and to my grandchildren, and to the honored memory of my law partner and mentor, Abe Berkowitz, and to my dad. And I would say, the people I've dedicated the book to, people I'm grateful to for making me who I am, or who I turned out to be.
Well, it certainly sounds like you have, from all of the different people who are in your book, that's your community. And those are the people who help to raise you, help to shape you, and ultimately.
That's very much true.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one community. Of course, the community of Norwood was
Sure.
another, but I think community is very important in our lives. We it's hard enough to get through life feeling alone so
Mm-hmm.
much, but to be with other people, to be in community, I think is a human need. So that I have lived a serendipitous life. Getting a newspaper route to begin with changed my life in many ways. Meeting the Millers, I wouldn't have met them, but they moved on to my paper route.
Mm-hmm.
That was serendipitous, and it all led right to an interview with Abe Berkowitz, which I've outlined here in my book.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about you're at Birmingham Southern for undergraduate. Where did you go to law school?
I worked a couple of years, got married, had a baby, and I was trying to figure out. Actually, it was my wife trying to figure out how I'm going to make a living.
Sure.
And so I had a cousin in law school at the
Mm-hmm.
time, and a friend in law school, and so I decided, well, I wonder if I could make a living if I went to law school. And so she said, well, let's do it. So I went to law school and at Cumberland Law at Samford University, and I did well, and eventually got a job with Abe Berkowitz, who I had admired through his letters to the editor of the newspaper. And again, that's 3 times the newspaper's changed my life.
That's right.
When I got my paper route, when the Millers moved on to my paper route,
Mm-hmm.
and reading Abe Berkowitz letters to the editor, that took me, that letter he wrote about John Kennedy
Mm-hmm.
took me to see him about a job. And I've been with that law firm now 51 years.
When you first went in to interview with Mr. Berkowitz, what was that like when you first went in and first met the man and had your first initial conversation
Well,
with him?
I had read his letter to the news, Birmingham News, about John Kennedy, who was reviled and vilified in the newspaper articles because, as a Catholic, he's taken our country to hell in a handbasket.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Obama was treated, like I guess some people would say like Trump is treated, but he was vilified, and so Abe Berkowitz wrote this wonderful letter saying he is my president, and it was a great letter. And 18 months later, I went to see him about a job. I had just finished my first year in law school and wanted a summer job with a law firm. I didn't, I'm so green, so country, I didn't even call for an interview. I didn't know, I just went to see him.
Just showed up at the door.
Yeah, and unbelievably, he sat with me for 15 minutes, asked me a bunch of questions, and then he told me he didn't have a place for me because we're a small law firm and we've got a place for one summer lawyer, but that one summer law student, but that's all. Mm-hmm. And so I was about to stand up to thank him for being courteous, for his courtesies. And I was on the edge of my seat ready to stand, but he's still sitting there. And obviously he was going to say something, but what? And finally he said, "Why are you here?" Mm-hmm. And that was the end of chapter 1 of my book. Mm-hmm. Chapter 48 picks up that interview, and what he meant was, why don't you come to see me? of all people, why? I'm just a small law firm. And I told him I came to see him because of his letters to the editor. And then he spent probably another 30, 45 minutes with me pulling my story out of me, a story I didn't even know I had. And it was remarkable. And he didn't have a summer job for me, but he arranged a summer job for me. And, you know, and then 2 years later, when I about to finish law school, he called me and wanted me to come in for an interview. And so I never even looked for a job.
And
third time.
51 years later.
51 years later, I'm still here.
That's right.
With the same firm. We've merged 15 years ago. Mrs. Berkowitz died in 1985. We merged in 2003 with Baker Donaldson. And the name of the firm is now Baker Donaldson, Beerman, Caldwell, and Berkowitz. So I'm still working with a law firm, which the name Berkowitz is there.
Well, that certainly is indicative of the man who he was. And the impact that he had not only locally but globally. We could talk all day and night about Mr. Berkowitz.
He had a huge history of activity in civil rights and other community activities.
And going overseas before Israel became a country and all of those activities. That's the stuff movies are made of.
He was very active in various ways for the state of Israel in 1947. Yeah.
Well, for those of you just joining us, and good morning to Morris and to Scott and Jeff Bear in Tokyo. Good to see you, bud. We're talking with Chervis Isom. Chervis is a longtime Birmingham attorney, civil activist, a neighborhood activist. Chervis wrote a wonderful book, The Newspaper Boy. We're talking about some of the memories out of Chervis's life from the book. And if you haven't read the book, I highly encourage you to pick up a copy. I know you get it on Amazon, maybe some of the local bookstores here in Birmingham still have copies. But it is a fantastic read. In fact, I've read it 3 times now.
Thank you. It's a book about coming of age in Birmingham during the Civil Rights era. It's about my evolution out of Jim Crow racism and how it occurred over a period of time, but primarily beginning with when I was about 16 or 17, with a couple on my newspaper route from up north, whose name was Vernon and Helen Miller, and they continue to live in this community all these years later. In fact, I had dinner with them recently, celebrating Helen's 90th birthday.
Oh, wow, fantastic. Chervis, I know that. Well, I don't know because I didn't grow up in the Birmingham era and during your same time period, but I would assume it would have been from the mindset and the way that culture was in Birmingham and in the Deep South. For someone coming of age, it would have been very easy as you get older in life to just push down those feelings, never talk about them, ignore the past, and you didn't do that. In fact, you did the complete opposite of that. You wrote this phenomenal book. But even better than that, the person who you have described have evolved to the person that you are today. And I think that it's just so important that stories like this, your story, and there's many others locally and all over the United States that share how they've evolved. And I applaud your efforts for that, and I appreciate you sharing that story with us.
I think it's one lesson to come out of this book is how important it is for each of us to be a mentor to someone else. But if the Millers had never said anything to me, when would I have changed? When would I have ever come out of the racism I grew up in? My father was a bus driver, and civil rights really began first in transportation, and he was on the front line, and he had some unpleasant experiences because he was obligated to move black people to the back of the bus. That was the law, and he he thought it was the right thing to do. I couldn't have written the book out of loyalty to him, but I realized I have a story in here late in the book about his reconciliation. I believe once he retired from Greyhound bus lines, he worked at a bank as a mail clerk. And at that time, in the late 70s and 80s, there were black folks in responsible positions at the bank, and he was delivering their mail, which, was would have been a strange experience for my dad, and he was able to reconcile things, and he came to respect and I think love a lot of the people he worked with, and I think his life, he changed a great deal, as I did, but he didn't change me, nor did I change him. Outside circumstances changed the both of us.
Well, I think that the evolution of society and how our laws changed, how the thoughts of just the people changing the laws or wanting changes, I think helped. And there were so many things, and to me, it all goes back to community. If you're not part of it, then you're isolated and you have your own thoughts and you never change.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But also, the changing of the law had a lot to do with it, because until the law changed, our society was not going to change. It was going to always be
Certainly.
As it was, at least in the Deep South. And I think the changing of the law led to today's circumstances, which are certainly not ideal, but at least people can meet across the color lines and get to know each other in places of employment. And it's gratifying to me to go downtown, to be in town and go to somewhere for lunch, and the tables are, people who work together, black and white, have lunch together, and it's a good feeling to see the diversity and interaction that's occurring. Now, I know we got a long way to go. I mean, we have white churches and black churches, and the schools, after all these years, are still not integrated. Yet we're making progress, I hope.
For people who've never been to Birmingham, never been in the Deep South, and have only read books and watched movies and have third-hand accounts of what may have still be going on here, I think people may be pleasantly surprised when they visit Birmingham. I know that for when we have friends and family who've never been here or inquire, you get some raised eyebrows, I think, in a good way.
Yeah.
But Chervis, I sure appreciate you spending some time with me this morning.
It's been my pleasure.
And for those of you watching, I meant to say earlier, Chervis, if folks want to reach out to you, if they want to continue the conversation, how can they reach you?
Well, I guess the simplest thing to do would be look at my website, which is www.thenewspaperboy.net, and that is a website that's got summaries of my book and interviews and a blog and so forth.
And I'll put that in the comments section after we're finished today.
But I'm with Baker Donaldson Law Firm. Look me up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, guys, this will conclude for our episode for today. And I sure appreciate, Chervis, you spending some time with me.
Hey, I've enjoyed it very much.
Yes, sir.
It's been a pleasure.
Please, even after today, we'll rerun this over the next couple of months, and we'll also put links to how to get in touch with Chervis should you want to reach out to him.
Yeah.
We'll be back again next Tuesday at same time, usual place. But thank you for spending some time with us today. Hope you guys have a good rest of your week, and we'll catch you next week.
Thank you.